What is up, night crawlers? Welcome back to the Nightmare's Edge. Today, I bring you 5 terrifying tales of demonic activity that left the authors scared and questioning. I want to say thank you to those authors for allowing me to narrate their experiences. I'm certain these experiences left a lasting mark. That being said, be sure to check the description for the links to those stories. Now, sit back, relax, and let me tickle those inner fears. Giant Demonic Spider by Actually Dead. These happened about 5 years ago when I was living a very destructive lifestyle. I woke up having a view of myself in third person and first person at the same time. I was laying down, paralyzed and levitating about 4 feet off my bed, with my blanket still dropped over me. I noticed a massive tarantula-like spider that was big enough to cover my entire chest sitting on top of me. I was absolutely petrified. I remember the entity trying to give me a very strong, menacing sense of superiority, like it was stronger than me and that it was in control of the situation. After 10 seconds of this, it began speaking to me telepathically. In a very deep voice, it said, "My name is," then saying an extremely bizarre sounding name from a language I've never heard of before, and I don't think I could spell it if I tried. It felt like whatever it was trying to possess me, because like I said, it gave a very strong feeling that it was superior than me, and in charge of my life now. It was introducing itself. That was the last thing I remembered before waking up. I had another experience with the spider where I'd just woken up, and wasn't paralyzed this time. The entity was on my roof at the other side of the room. This time, it didn't look like a solid being. It looked like it was made out of pure energy. When it noticed that I could see, it started scurrying towards me very aggressively. And before it got to me, it disappeared. That all happened within like 10 seconds. This one happened around the same time. I had woken up on my bed. I had the same POVs and I was paralyzed again, but this time I wasn't levitating. I suddenly felt an invisible force grab onto my left leg. It very slowly started dragging me off the bed, and I was being dragged. My body was violently flopping around like a rag doll. I had no control over this. I realized what was happening and I tried to call for Jesus, but as I was saying "Gee," something held my lips. I literally couldn't say his name, and I got the feeling that I was unworthy to speak it because of the way I was living. I remember feeling an immense feeling of dread and hopelessness. He wouldn't help me. This one felt like it was a warning to change my ways before it was too late. It was the last thing I remember before waking up. I know you guys will say sleep paralysis, but I feel entities can attack us in our dream state and cause what's known as sleep paralysis. There's more stories where people called on Jesus, and it ended the sleep paralysis episode. Am I saying all sleep paralysis episodes are demonic? I don't know, but mine certainly felt like it. I seen that spider thing another time while I wasn't in sleep paralysis, as I explained in my second section. So that's another reason that pushed me to believe it was really demonic. I also stupidly experimented with astral projection, and had the same third and first person views, astral projecting, as I did during my episodes. I've been targeted by other entities while I was intentionally astral projecting, but that's another story. A Haunting in Rural Utah by The Past Magician. This is my first Reddit post, so I may as well start with a bang. Back in 2011, I was living in a rural town called Monroe, Utah, finishing up my senior year in high school. Monroe is a town of around 2,000 residents, and is home to one of the largest mountains in Utah, which my grandparents' house, where I was living at the time, resided at the base of. Our house was on top of a foothill, and overlooked the quaint Monroe Valley. The house itself was about 3,500 square feet, with an entryway, foyer, that was approximately 25 feet high, and had a front room on either side of the entryway. and then the main living room and kitchen towards the back of the house facing the mountain. The upstairs had 3 bedrooms, a small library, and then a balcony overlooking the foyer. The basement was a house itself, complete with 3 bedrooms, a living room, and a kitchen. Hopefully this paints y'all a picture of the setting. At this point in my life, my grandpa had recently been diagnosed with cancer. Because we didn't have a hospital in the area with an adequate treatment center, my grandparents temporarily moved to southern Utah, where there was a hospital, and left me with a house to finish off my high school graduation and part of the summer, May through July. Because of this, my house was notorious for having boys over, where we would have parties, and then play massive games of hide and seek in the dark. Sounds childish, but man, it was fun. I was also keen on having my friends over at all times, because being alone in a large home is creepy sometimes. And also, because I had several encounters with spirits at one point in my life when I was living with my mom. But that is a story for another time. Anyway, I didn't want to be alone in the house and preferred having people over. Well, right around the middle of June, I had 2 of my best friends over. Let's call them Jake and Sam. Each of us had a girl over and had picked a room to hang out with them. If you're a religious person, then you probably believe that certain activities aren't necessarily inviting of the Holy Ghost. And then let's just say, my 2 friends and their girls at my place were doing what I would be considered uninviting the Holy Spirit. LOL. I was with my best friend's sister and had recently been baptized, so I wasn't trying to get down with this girl at this point. Well, I hear a door shut, and my 3rd friend, let's call him Jaden, shows up after having gotten down with his girl at her place. Now I say this because if you're heavily religious, then you believe that the Holy Spirit was probably not in the house at all on this particular evening. But if you aren't religious, then disregard this paragraph. We end up sending the girls home, and it's just us boys enjoying our senior summer playing COD Zombies, which I wasn't really into, but I enjoyed watching my friends play. Well, 2:30 a.m. starts to roll around, and my friend Jake asks if we want to play hide and seek in the dark. 1. We play the game while the COD Zombies theme song plays throughout the house, and 2. No hiding in the basement because it's pitch black. Looking back to this night, the moon was fairly bright, so your eyes would adjust quickly to the nighttime if you were hiding and seeking upstairs, but not at all downstairs. Jake, Sam, and I were into scary shit, but Jaden wasn't the biggest fan of it. Regardless, we all decided to play the game to this creepy music, and Jake was the first one as seeker. Sam, Jaden, and I immediately agreed to be bastards and hide in the basement because we knew it'd take Jake forever to find us. So we hide in one of the bedrooms that was filled with a bunch of wooden chairs. About 10 minutes into him searching, we hear him come downstairs and he begins to talk to someone or someone's on the basement stairs. We then hear him yell something to these people, and then he enters the room we're hiding in. He starts moving loads of these chairs to find us, and we start giggling like girls because we knew we broke the rules. We ask him who he was talking to, and he says, "Dude, I thought I was talking to Sam and Jaden, but all of you guys were here, so I have no clue who the silhouettes were on the stairs, that were just looking at me and then ran away." Jake loves scary shit, so we shrugged it off like it was typical Jake trying to make the situation scary or creepy at night. Anyway, 15 to 20 minutes is a long time for one round of hide and seek, so we decide to just chill in the living room on the main floor, while the COD zombie music is playing. After a few minutes of us hanging out, I say, we should watch a real exorcism video. I bet I can find one online. So I bust out my Mac and start searching for a video on obscure websites, and finally find a vid. Jake was all for this, but Jaden and Sam were hesitant, understandably so. But I'm me, and I don't give a fuck, so I turn it on. Interestingly enough, this was shortly after 3 a.m. and was during the witching hour, which I didn't think about until after the fact. So Jake and I are watching this priest just douse this random woman in holy water while the priest is chanting Hebrew at her. The girl is strapped to a table and her body is convulsing, like the chick from The Ring. I remember watching this video and getting cold chills immediately, but I was mesmerized because I'd never seen anything so raw and real of this nature. I couldn't look away. Sam and Jaden tell me to turn it off, and even Jake looks hesitant. This is when things go south real quick. About 20 seconds into the video, I start hearing a knocking noise. Damn, I'm getting cold chills simply typing this. This knocking noise was coming from the master bedroom directly above us in the living room, and it continually gets louder and louder and louder, and suddenly it sounds like 4 or 5 people are running and slamming violently into the walls in the room above us. I look at Jake's face because he was sitting next to me, and I can barely make out a look of horror on his face because, again, the lights were turned off everywhere in the house. Then I hear the chandelier in the foyer quake, and at this point, I'm on high alert thinking, oh shit. Despite Jake fooling around this night, he was a relative goody-goody, and I had never heard him say the F word, but he immediately screams, "Turn it the fuck off." I slam my laptop shut and all 4 of us run directly to the back doors, which was 10 feet away from us. As we're running, we hear a loud thud, 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 as if someone is punching the basement, crawling from underneath us. It sounded like someone or something was trying to just tear through the floor beneath our feet. We made it outside during this time and everything in the house goes silent. No more running from upstairs, no more chandeliers swinging, and no more punching ceiling noises from the basement. It's just us in the middle of the open night sky, torn between trying to look away from the house and towards the mountains, but simultaneously checking to see if someone was going to run out of the house. The house was dead quiet, as if nothing ever happened, and we're all gazing into the house from the backyard. We were probably out in the backyard for 2 minutes in complete silence. I had noticed that Jaden was messaging with someone frantically. We were outside and he looks at me and says, "Michelle told me she was in the house with her drill team friends like 10 minutes ago, but she told me she was only joking. So what in the hell made those noises?" Backstory: everyone in the small town knew my grandparents were away, so it was common for my friends to just pop in the house whenever. Especially the drill team gals, as they were some of our close friends. Right after he says this, I looked at the other guys and all 3 of them were shedding tears. All 3 of them were shook to their core about what had happened. During that 45-second window of pure chaos, we each felt a sense of dread and hopelessness sweep over us. It was 1000% a bad spirit, or a few, that had just been in that house. Well, I have this house for another 6 weeks, and at some point I'm going to have to go back in there and sleep in there, so we have to go back in and see what happened. Understandably, they were strongly against the idea, but I felt spiritually strong because of my recent baptism. So I led the way while we single-filedly walked in the house, while each of their hands were gripping the person's shirt in front of them. "We should go to the basement first because it's the scariest and most obvious place where the banging noises were coming from," I say. We slowly creep down the basement steps, and I flip on the lights and see that the living room and kitchen were destroyed. The ceiling fans were laying on the ground, and, at an initial glance, it had looked like it was ripped straight off the ceiling. There were broken shards of glass and wood chips from the chaos scattered around the room. Now I'm thinking, how in the hell am I going to explain this to my family? Then we decide to search the rest of the house. The only other inexplicable thing was that the master bedroom's closet light was turned on, and we didn't ever turn on. The same night, I decided to go to bed in my room while the guys slept downstairs, because I was on a spiritual high and felt safe. But my friends each felt like they had uninvited the spirit from their sexual endeavors earlier that night, so they all slept in the living room downstairs. Jake woke up the next morning and had a nightmare about a little girl standing in the living room watching them sleep. But Jake loves scary things, so we never really knew if he was being truthful about that dream or not. He's an extremely honest person, but he loves overhyping these types of things. So I never knew what to make of this dream of his. Fast forward to that weekend. My grandparents came over after my grandpa's radiation treatment because I told them what had happened. They're somewhat religious, but not church fanatics, so they weren't sure what to believe at first, but they knew I wasn't a liar, so they took my story as truth. I walked downstairs to the basement with my grandparents, and my grandpa bent a knee to look at the ceiling fan's wiring, and he said, "This was cut perfectly across. Someone did this intentionally. This didn't fall out of the ceiling." Since that day, it only furthered my testimony of a God and an evil. As of 2016, I've started to have weekly reoccurring variations of a dream where I was in that house with a dark presence. I honestly might go to therapy after talking to my wife about it, as it seems to have caused lingering PTSD in some type of form for me. I'll be grateful for that night, because it caused for one hell of a story and an everlasting best friendship with those three guys. Do you think the silhouettes on the stairs from earlier that night were the same spirits that messed with us? Or do you think that they were simply just shadows? Would you all like to hear my other spooky stories? The demon claw I've seen. Legitimate Cajun 96. Okay, so I've been lurking this community for a while. I love reading all of your stories. I've commented some, but I've never read a story like the one I'm going to tell you. I had hoped that I would, so I wouldn't be the only one, and could get some perspective insights on what y'all think. When I was growing up, my family lived in this huge, beautiful Southern-style home. I loved it. I had very good memories there. However, it was the most active home of all that I've lived in since. Very active, but only to my mother and I. My two brothers and my dad never had any experiences. My mother had a couple. I was the only girl, and about 3 when we moved in, and I had a lot. At first, being so young, I didn't think anything of the experiences. I didn't know any better. Later, I'd find out they were not what other people see or interact with normally. I will just tell you all the one that most stands out. One night, I woke up and rolled over. I was barely awake and it was dark in the room. I didn't have a nightlight. There was some black thing lingering at the foot of my bed. I couldn't make it out right then. I sat up in my bed and tried to make it out. I still couldn't really. So I got on my knees and leaned toward it. Now remember, the whole room is dark, but I can clearly see it's something there. It's not a figure. It's just suspended in darkness. As I leaned towards it, within 2 feet, it looks like a hand, but not a hand because it only had 3 fingers, bent slightly as if it were just hanging there. It had no fingernails but pointy tips. It wasn't connected to any body either. I just leaned back against my head frame and watched it until I fell back asleep. It never moved. This happened a couple more times, but it seemed to be closer to me each time. Then one night my cousin stayed over and she slept with me. I woke up and rolled to face her, and it was right there, in my face, hanging directly over her as she slept. It had never been that close before. I was scared. I could actually reach out and touch it, and I wanted to. I reached my arm out and then it pulled back. I never did touch it. I just watched it until I went to sleep again. That was the last time I saw it. Fast forward 10 years. I was helping my mom in the kitchen with supper. As we were talking, that old house came up. I finally told her what I saw and she immediately stopped what she was doing. She asked me more. Then she took 2 pieces of paper out and asked me to draw it. While she was doing something on the other piece of paper. When I finished, and she finished, she asked me to swap the papers, and we did. She had drawn the same thing. We both just looked at each other in amazement. She told me when she was little, she went to a slumber party. All the girls slept on the living room floor, in the sleeping bags. She said she woke up in the middle of the night, and saw this claw thing hanging over the girl next to her. She reached out to touch it, and before she did, the girl screamed loudly. Everyone woke up, and the girl was crying and saying someone had pinched her. My mom was accused of doing this. She swore she never would have done such a thing, but this girl had been clearly pinched hard enough to draw blood. I've did some research and haven't come up with anything this claw could be. What do you all think? My Scariest Paranormal Experience by Legitimate Dog 4864. I was visiting my grandmother's house up in cold northern Norway. I've always had weird feelings while staying there. Always felt like I was being watched at all times. A constant feeling of unease. especially on the second floor where me and my little sister were staying. Upstairs is 2 rooms. I slept in the room closest to the staircase, and my sister had the adjacent room. The house is fairly old and is rather noisy. Often, getting woken up at night by my sister, walking past my room to go to the bathroom, which is downstairs. My grandmother had struggled for a long time with her sleep. She always wakes up at 3 a.m. every night. She has claimed that there is activity around the house. The classic door opening and closing, sounds of footsteps, and that feeling you are not alone. It was around 2 or 3 a.m., and I could not fall asleep. Was basically rolling around in my bed, and ended up laying in bed staring at the wall. The room started feeling much colder than usual, and something that happened next still gives me chills to this day. I heard loud, raspy breathing right behind me, like someone was laying in bed behind me, breathing heavily. I'll try to describe what it sounded like. It sounded like someone who was very sick, struggling to breathe. I felt air brush over the back of my neck, and I completely froze. I was terrified. The breathing lasted for several seconds, but it felt like forever. I started to count to 5 before I would turn over to see if anything was behind me, and nothing. The room was left in an eerie silence. My heart was pounding so fast and hard it felt like it was going to jump out of my throat. And I was staring at the door, almost like expecting it to open. And it did, while staring at the door. I see the door handle go down slowly, and the door creaking open. It's hard for me to explain what I felt at that moment, but it was overwhelming. I managed to leap out of the bed and move into the hallway to try and find any explanation of what happened. But I saw nothing, heard nothing. The windows were all closed, so I couldn't find any explanation of what happened. It felt like I sat in that bed for days, but it was only for a few hours. When the morning finally arrived, I went downstairs and sat myself down in the living room. My sister and grandmother were in the kitchen, and I overheard my sister telling my grandmother something, that around 2 or 3 a.m., she was woken up by a loud, raspy breathing in her room. When I overheard that, it gave me chills to the bones and made me feel even more terrified. Me and my sister used to visit my grandmother every year, but it's been a fairly long time since I managed to get myself to visit my grandmother again. This event happened when I was 16 years old, and I'm now 24. Can't make myself go back there just yet, but planning to go there next year. My grandmother is having a hard time lately, so hopefully I can visit her before it's too late. Maybe I'll get new experiences to write about when I go back there. Thanks for reading about my experience. It's something I will never forget, and I felt like sharing it with everyone in here. Hope my English wasn't too bad since it's not my first language. Weird Night in Canggu, Bali. Written by Upstairs OK. Okay, this will be my first post, but maybe I'll do more since I've had a couple weird experiences throughout my life. I'm Dutch, so apologies for any mistakes in my writing or sentences. So roughly 10 years ago, I went on a 3-week holiday with my girlfriend. We booked a beautiful private villa in a town called Canggu. It had a double bedroom, a big lounge, and a swimming pool with a view over the rice paddies. To get to the entrance of the villa, we had to walk through the alley, and on the left was a big fenced-off house. I always take notice to my surroundings when I'm in a new area, and it looked to me that this place was occupied by locals. Their cars were behind the fence, and I saw a dog walking around on the property. On the second night, that dog started barking off and on. My family owns dogs since I was little, so I know it's normal for a dog to bark out of fear occasionally, so I let it be. But I was checking out the place with a bit more attention. I'm curious by nature, and now inclined to start asking around if anybody knew something about that situation. The Balinese boy who came to manage the pool didn't speak English too well, so I was asking the cleaning lady. She was very nice, and she told me that the residents were still living there, but were out of town for some reason. I also asked if she knew if the dog was getting any attention from the owners, and she replied that the residents came in every day around noon to manage things. So now it's the fourth night in, and the dog is still barking at night. It starts as soon as it gets dark, and I'm beginning to worry about the four-legged furball. I tried to calm it down a couple times by calling it to the fence, but it was just too frightened to come near. So next day, I'm out on post at noon, and indeed I see someone at the house. I walk up and said hi, but no speaking English, so I started making barking sounds and pointing to their fence. Didn't make sense to the guy. I guess he was in a hurry. All of a sudden, he walked out with a forced smile. Then the fifth morning, I'm looking in the bathroom mirror, and I got bags under my eyes. So does my girlfriend, but she's more capable of zoning out the noise of the dog and falling asleep anyway. I'm calling the owner of our villa now, and since they are Dutchies too, it makes it pretty easy to explain what's happening. They told me they were out of town and wouldn't be back until after the weekend. I told them about the neighbor dog barking me out of sleep for 4 days straight, and they comforted me saying that they will compensate us for it. Just visit us after the weekend and we'll sort things out. Fifth night, we fell asleep, but around midnight it woke me up again. Dog was in terror, and I decided to check it out again. This was not normal, and I was getting more frustrated and agitated thinking, how can I shut the dog's trap? I know it's not the dog's fault, but I needed a quick solution to shut it up and get some sleep after 4 nights. So in the dead of night, I got a bucket and filled it with water, sneaked up stealth mode, and threw it over the fence. I couldn't see the dog, but I knew it was a hit because it gave me a single surprised bark, and then it stopped. I stayed there for a little bit to see if anything weird was going on, and I just got this weird vibe around me. One I recognized and gave me goosebumps. I rushed back to bed and fell in a deep, deep sleep. Now it starts to get weird. In my dream that same night, I'm aware I'm dreaming and something is attacking me. I get pinned down. I'm not able to move anymore. I know I'm dreaming and I force myself to wake up, but I can't. While I'm fighting this thing off of me in my dream, I wake up and realize I'm still fighting it. It takes me quite some force to realize the weight of me, and I'm making sounds as if I'm weightlifting far above my strength. I literally feel my stomach being pushed down to the max, and I'm in survival mode struggling to push it off as it slowly floats away. The transition from a dream to wake state was so weird. I'm screaming at it in my dream, putting up a fight. I wake up and I'm roaring, still fighting, while an intense force is crushing my stomach and chest. When finally I come to my senses, I'm sitting straight up in bed next to my girl who slept through it all. I had to meditate a bit and fell asleep again and told my girl the story when we woke up. Weird thing is, after that night, the dog stopped barking and everything turned normal. After the weekend, I got in touch with the owners and they told me the neighbors got into a family fight. The cleaning lady was familiar with the neighbors and she told me eventually that voodoo was used in the family affair. It turned so bad for the neighbors that they had to flee their house and were living in with family. They left the dog to protect the property, poor dog, and only were brave enough to visit the place during the day. The owner we rented the place from gave us our first week for free. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you again, authors, for allowing me to read these stories. So until next time, remember, just because you couldn't see it, doesn't mean it wasn't watching you.